So my background is secondary education.
Mm.
Kind of you're all in it together. So you do everything together. You write a scheme of work, you share it with your peers, you might share it with other schools in the county. You will put it on the test platform, which then had free sharing of materials.
That's Samantha Ahern, one of the new fellows of the Software Sustainability Institute in the UK, the SSI. And for this episode, I want you to meet not only Samantha, but also some of the other people who were awarded the SSI Fellowship for 2026 this year, that is Anne-Lee Steele, Cassandra Gould from Prague, and Sara Villa. As Samantha said, we're all in this together. And this, I think, sums up very nicely the fellowship program of the SSI in the UK. And like in previous years, we have a new round of fellows who, in all their very different ways, want to help make research more open and the software we create as part of our projects more sustainable and reproducible. And that this doesn't involve only technical skills and acumen is something that we'll find out in this episode. I invited 4 of the new fellows to talk about their quite different plans for their fellowship. Let's start with Anne-Lee, who I actually met before this interview, during a collaborations workshop in 2024. So here she is.
My name is Anne-Lee Steele. I'm a freelance facilitator, writer, and artist. I call myself someone that works broadly in kind of like the open technology ecosystem. So someone that facilitates projects that work in and around open practices. I was previously the community manager of the Turing Way project. And this fellowship with SSI really combines kind of different worlds that I've been a part of over the course of the past 5+ years now.
We met at the Turing Way, didn't we? Originally.
We did.
So I think it's a couple of years ago now, isn't it? Because I went to the collaborations workshop, I remember.
Yes. The Turing Way is really where I've learned so much around, what it means to facilitate a community, what it means to be a part of one, and how can you create work that kind of goes beyond the way in which you work to a broader set of like best practices and recommendations that others can take with them and use.
So now you're a freelancer. What do you specialize in freelancing? You also mentioned artists. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit.
Freelancing really came out of wanting to be distributed across as many industries as possible, I think, to learn about what facilitation and community looks like in those different places. So, for example, I'm a facilitator for the Missing Maps project, which is an open mapping project on OpenStreetMap, which creates data in order to respond to humanitarian crises. And I work with the British Red Cross as a freelancer to be able to facilitate what are called mapathons for, say, their corporate donors and things like that. That's like one kind of set of freelance practices for a community that I've been a part of, that I researched years ago. But honestly, I'm doing everything from that to designing websites for professional musicians, to this SSI fellowship, to all sorts of different things. I think to really understand like what are the problems that people are facing, like what's important to them after years of being, I think, very specialized in the Turing Way community. And it's been, who knows if I'll be like this forever. Who knows if I'll freelance forever, but I've learned a lot. And I think that was really what I was looking to do.
Yeah, we have to exchange war stories at some stage because, I've been a freelancer now for 3 years. But anyway, it's not about the freelancing now. It's about the SSI fellowship. So what is your fellowship about?
The fellowship is titled From Screens to Studios, or maybe From Studios to Screens, connecting academic computing with creative computing. And it really came from my desire to be able to kind of combine two worlds that I feel like I'd existed in parallel through the Turing Way and through these kind of like schools made by artists in and around like computing from another lens, from another approach. With the Turing Way, I've learned so much around what are research infrastructure roles? What are the types of roles that are ignored by the academy or aren't emphasized in like being a really important part of the research computing process, like research software engineers, for example? how do you build data sets or code bases that, have a lifetime beyond the funding scope of maybe 2-3 years for a project.
Right.
And these are problems that I think require public funding. They require huge amounts of investment. But when I was being exposed to these worlds, I was really asking, what's the inverse of that? What is a scale so small, but so creative that it makes you think differently about what is possible with computing, even for a second? And in my effort to kind of learn more about in many ways, what I'd felt to be a kind of inverse of academic computing, I started taking classes at these schools, like the School for Poetic Computation, which is based in New York, but runs classes globally, as well as the School for Machines, Making, and Make-Believe, which is based in Berlin, but also does things remotely. And I started taking these courses to really just kind of learn and ask questions around what are different approaches to how we might use computing. And I was in classes on poetics and infrastructure, around open source, around all sorts of different topics that I'd realized I'd been approaching in the Turing way, that I'd talked about, that I'd worked with, but they were taking it in completely different directions. What does a solar powered server look like that can power your personal website? What does perma-computing have to do with sustainability? What is a poetic website, and how can poetic thinking change the way in which we think about technology? And all of these questions were incredible to me because they were so totally different from the ones that I was asking in the Turing way. And it also gave me a sense of almost creative possibility beyond what I've increasingly felt to be this encroachment of power in this landscape, where what we're able to do is in fact dictated by the power structures that set the framework or set the boundaries of what is possible. And I think this helped me to kind of break through that. And so, to summarize my very long answer to your question, the fellowship is really about connecting these two worlds and seeding connections between the two, because artists think really creatively about technology, but sometimes they don't have institutional support, or maybe they're in these small worlds that don't connect outside of them. And academic computing is so important, and also thinks very creatively about different elements of computing. And maybe this connection would change the way they each approach their own work and positively affect both.
I'm quite intrigued by the group that you mentioned that happens in New York, and the other one in Berlin about poetic computing. And I try to get a sense of about what that is and what the course consisted of. If you mind indulging us for a second.
I think Audre Lorde puts it in a really good, Audre Lorde, the writer and thinker, puts it in a really good way when she says that poetry makes us believe that the impossible might be possible. It gives us a language through which we might believe that something else might exist, because poetry doesn't have, in some spaces it does, but it doesn't have these same regimented structures. It's become this very free form that allows us to think differently. And I think if you were to take that approach to computing, it's in many ways a no holds barred approach to it. It's poetic computing is computing that's oriented around beauty, belonging, possibility, hope, all of these things that I think we don't allow ourselves to feel in any other space besides in poetry, really, because it's so emotive. It's almost like a emphasis on the emotive rather than the rational. And I think that's what makes it different.
That's quite ambitious to actually get it done in an SSI fellowship. So how do you think you can bring these two worlds together?
This year, I'm really just focused on seeding connections. I think being a community worker means I know how long it takes to build trust. Maybe this is too much to put into the podcast, but I am hopeful. I'm hopeful about the scope of work I'll be able to complete over the course of the fellowship, but I am focused more on the act of building trust. And so what that will look like is the series of recorded interviews with folks, using some of my funding to be able to support RSEs or artists to enter each other's spaces. Because the important thing is that I don't want just myself to be the bridge. I want others to be bridges themselves. The culmination of this work will most likely be a small festival, probably based in London, just because of my base and networks here. But I think we would ideally maybe have an online element. that brings together artists and RSEs in pairings or workshops, but also small installations. Because funnily enough, releasing a survey this week about like invited folks to put in their interests and, you know, things that they specialize in. I was already seeing that people are overlapping in those worlds anyways, but they actually see them as quite separate. Like I have RSE friends that they'll knit. I have a friend that's a really, really big knitter. He like knits profusely when he's not working in his role in research software engineering, but he would never dare call himself an artist. And similarly, I have friends that work at technicians in art schools, and they have a practice on the side where they might develop like interactive sculptures. These worlds are completely separate. And I'm like, they're not necessarily. And I think to, in many ways, encourage the integration for people that already have that mix too is really just the goal.
I think you're right. There are actually quite a number of people out there who do coding, but then do something separate, as you say. But is then your feeling that what they do on their creative side, and I say creative in inverted commas because coding is creative too, but sort of creative in terms of writing or painting or knitting in that case, does that influence then backwards into the coding? Is that sort of the idea?
Absolutely. I mean, I think maybe the higher level goal of the project is probably just to like encourage and facilitate creativity, really. Maybe that's the primary issue that we're actually talking about, which is that as we become increasingly more specialized, creativity comes from the places of the fringes often, right? That like pushes us to think differently. And I think that might become harder to reach for people. And maybe to have that reminder that having creative hobbies is good, or that this work these things inform each other is in fact the goal, really. Because I've met so many people across the SSI community that have different ways of thinking about creativity and wonder how that might inform their work when, of course, it does. Like the head of SSI is also a playwright, right? Neil is a playwright as well, as well as a director of the Institute. So yeah, the more people we have that do that, I think the more we're able to do things differently.
So what do you plan to do with the interviews? Assuming that you do a bunch of interviews, would you publish them or would you summarize them? Or what do you think the next stage could be after that?
Definitely publishing them. I think having a visual or audio version of these interviews, but of course transliterated for people that prefer to read, I think would be important. I think that the whole point, I think, in building that kind of archive is to have that repository there and to have that so others can reference it, but also that the folks being interviewed can reference it. And I think through a series of interviews, there's kind of an underlying layer of figuring out the trends that people are saying. Like, what are the things that emerge again and again as problems? What are the things that emerge like again and again as possible ideas or directions that we might take things? So that's the underlying layer. But the top layer, I think, is really just as open as possible, as closed as necessary, right? And this is one of those definitely open elements.
Next, I want to move on to Cassandra, or Cass. Cass has recently been setting up her own organization, as she will tell us now.
My name's Cass. My full name is Cassandra. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the executive director of the RCM Cooperative, which is Research Community Management Cooperative.
And the reason we're talking today is because you've also become a fellow of the Software Sustainability Institute as of this year, the 2026 cohort.
Yeah.
So is the management that you just mentioned the reason why you went into the fellowship, or what is this project about that you're doing there?
My background is neuroscience, and then I found open science, and then somehow experienced that a way to bring people on board with open science is through research community management. So engaging a community of researchers. So I've been doing that for 5-6 years, community management, and been around the SSI as a kind of the fellowship funding and knew of them and things, but hadn't before had an opportunity to do a fellowship myself. So I supported other people's applications and things. And then in May this year, I was made redundant and had the opportunity to do following of the dreams, do exactly whatever it is that I wanted to do. And that's when we established the RCM Cooperative.
Could you quickly step back? So you were a community manager where before you got made it?
So first was Oxford, in their brain imaging department there. So that's my PhD, and background is in MRI. And then I moved to the Alan Turing Institute doing community management for a few different communities there.
And now you set up the cooperative. Well, that sounds quite interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about that before we go back to the fellowship?
Yeah. So it's new. It's relatively new. At the moment, what we're doing is small bits of contract work, sort of varying scales. So far, the ones that I've really enjoyed have been research-based, conducting research about people's communities on their behalf and helping kind of form recommendations or practices. And I'm also doing a bit of mentoring. So I've got a couple of people in different communities that I'm supporting, because often community managers are working by themselves. So I'm like someone with experience that they can talk to when we meet up monthly and talk through their issues. And then we're also doing training as well. So we've run one training program with SSI and we're working up another at the moment. So helping people who are often doing this work kind of informally. So people might be managing a Slack channel or trying to bring people to their events or any kind of community engagement, but they haven't had any formal training and templates or structures or anything to follow. So the co-op is myself and two of my other colleagues at Turing and other people in our kind of space who have some background of shared frameworks, and we're also developing some new frameworks as well, which should be generalizable.
So back to the SSI fellowship. So what is that about then, the project itself?
So I'm a data nerd, really, by background in brain imaging. And when I was managing my community at Oxford, it was around 200 people. And most of the kind of knowledge about that community was in my head. Like I knew who were our most engaged members. I knew who I could call on. I knew who was connected where. But when you're managing a larger community, like the one at Turing was, around 1,000 people, and it needs to be a more scalable way of managing the data about that community, who they are, where they are, who's engaged, who's coming to things, who's interested in what. So there are a number of different tools designed for enterprise to manage the data about communities, but there aren't any that are designed for research communities. So that's part of the tooling that I've been developing at Turing and I'm extending now. But taking a step back from how do we manage this data about our community to what are the ethical implications of managing that data? So, for example, where I see engagement on Slack, when someone likes something for the first time, or if they comment on something, or if they add something, their activity there is informative of their intent. Like, what are they interested in? What do they want to know more about? And where I move from tracking that implicitly with my own understanding to actually recording that data, or even automation of recording of that data, there raises some ethical issues around surveillance, for example. So if we tell people, or if we don't tell people that we're monitoring their engagement on Slack when they comment something, that becomes a data point. If we don't tell people, what are the implications? If we do tell people that they're being surveilled in this way, does that impact their behavior? Will they, we call this a chilling effect, will they engage less in the community if they know that they're being monitored? So all of this ethical exploration work doesn't really happen in closed communities. And where the community activity is all open, like it's all on GitHub, it's sort of like, well, you're doing it in the public, so of course that data is being used. But even then, there's not really been these ethical conversations about, what does it mean to monitor people in communities? And it's tricky because it's such important and valuable data to have, but without structure to collect the data and without ways of understanding how it impacts the community, it kind of goes nowhere. So nothing is being developed. And more importantly, we want to develop it in the right way. I'm very opposed to the go fast and break things principles. We want to go slowly and do it right and do it with our community being fully informed so they can help us build something that meets our needs as data managers, but also meets their needs as people that are data subjects.
Drilling down a little bit. So we're talking about managing communities. That means taking account of people's email addresses, their handles in, say, Slack or other social media like Mastodon, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, etc., and monitoring that. How do you do that, actually? There are companies that are specialized in tracking all of that information, and there are APIs in order to do that, I think, that allow you to do that. So are you developing your own tools or are you reusing others?
So at the moment, it's cobbled together. This kind of aggregation of the data is something that I've done a few different times, and it usually goes draw down the mailing list, draw down the Slack membership list, try and match across and see like who's on both bases, but at the moment it's all happening like a monthly or like at some interval, pull down the data and have a look at it and update a model. But we got really close twice to having the funding to develop it at more like formal automation. What this should be looking like is a CRM, a client relationship manager, which is something that's used a lot in sales spaces. Yes. But the one that looks like the best fit for our space is called Civi CRM, which is used in a lot of nonprofits and things. So there might be a bit of new tooling or adaptation of existing tooling. But actually, I'm relieved that we haven't got as far as having this funded before having those ethical conversations, because I think we don't want to try and run away with developing the technology, because the technology is not the hard part, right? You know, there are many ways of collecting this information, and that's not the hard part. The hard part is doing it well. And like I said, I really would like to progress that meaningfully before we move into the tooling too much further.
So what is your idea of involving people whose data you might collect in this process? How do you see that happening in practical terms?
So for collaborations workshop coming up with SSI, we successfully had a session where we're going to first talk about the metrics that we could collect and then have a discussion basically about ethical frameworks. It might just be that. It might be focus groups and collecting people's ideas and giving some structured prompts and having discussions in a very casual way. But then my mentor is also a kind of a technology ethics specialist as well. So I want to go a bit further than focus groups, ultimately a bit further than sort of focus groups and discussions. But in the scope of the SSI fellowship, it may just be focus groups, but we'll see what other methodologies. Like that kind of focus group discussion is something I'm very comfortable with. We could do collaboration cafes, online meeting spaces with discussion prompts and things. But I'm interested to see what more it could be, how else we could structure the conversations. Ethics is not my thing. I'm very ethically engaged, but as a formal methodology and discipline, that's not my background at all. So I'm pleased to have a mentor who's more skilled in that space.
I would imagine, intuitively you might think you know what it is, but in actual fact, there may be a lot more involved. What made you actually go for the SSI fellowship specifically? How do you think that the fellowship is going to help you with all of this?
First, it was the freedom that I currently have, that I've been afforded by setting up my own organization, or not by myself, of course, but there was no one else I had to ask permission from, which I think wouldn't have been a problem with my old leadership, but it definitely wouldn't have been such a simple solution. I'm free to prioritize my time in any way that I think is appropriate, given what we're trying to achieve. So that made it a really easy decision. Also, the funding is useful at the moment while we're in this kind of startup, very much in startup. The little bit of funding that we can bring into this is great. I'm also a big fan of having a deadline. So I was, I was like, if I can get some sort of deadline towards doing these things, having these conversations, some required outputs, then that's going to make it much easier for them to actually happen. Otherwise, it could just be something that we're talking about. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if? So those are the kind of the boring features of it. And I've got money and a deadline and time. But actually, I knew that the SSI community and all the people that they're the fellows and also the wider community would be the right people to talk to about this, because they understand the technology and there's already a lot of community minded folks in there. So they would know what it meant as a participant, but also as a manager to be surveilled. I'm sort of doing air quotes, surveilled. It's sort of an intentionally provocative word that I use around it to help convey the potential impact of what we're doing. So surveillance with air quotes. So they're the right people to talk to about it. And also the mentoring side of it is this means that I can have a relationship fast tracked. If I wanted to speak to an ethicist or someone around these issues, then that would all be on me otherwise. But by having a mentor, and we were asked to say, who would you like? What sort of mentor would you like? And I was like, I happen to know this person who would be very good. And thankfully they accepted. So it's the structure it provides really is all fantastic, as well as the people that you're able to engage with low friction.
So community management, it's a wide title, a very broad one. How do you see this is different in research as opposed to, say, someone in a company or in a private enterprise? So what do you think that makes it special for research environments?
There's two main differences. One is the motivation of the group that's organizing the community. What are we making a community for? And then the other is our members, like why are they wanting to participate in community? There are multiple reasons, but the two kind of big models of community for industry, it's more of a marketing tool. So they build a community to grow a group of ambassadors who will talk about their product and promote it when they're not there. So you're kind of a sales conduit or a marketing tool. But that's slightly different to academic communities, where really our goal is to support complex problem solving. So we want to bring the right people together and diverse groups of people to help them have conversations which solve the problems that they really care about. So it's very much a bottom up, less of a marketing thing, more of a complex problem solving kind of organism. There's interestingly a lot of talk at the moment in enterprise and industry communities about the impact of LLMs on community engagement. So another thing that in industry communities are often used to solve low, like help desk tickets. So instead of saying, send a ticket to the help desk of, I don't know, whatever industry place you are, instead of help desk dealing with it, a community member answers a question, and then that reduces the cost of managing that ticket. But now with LLMs, there's less of a need for a average person to answer an averagely easy FAQ type question in an enterprise community. So there's a shift happening at the moment, kind of the realization that, you know, the role of the community member in an enterprise community in kind of supporting help desk, that is going to change. But my feeling at the moment is that the type of questions that get asked in academic communities, for example, on the Turing Way, which is another community I'm involved in, the type of questions that get asked there are very often not the sort of thing that can be answered by an LLM unless it's trained explicitly on the community kind of information, which it could be. It's just more expert specific knowledge that the average LLM won't have access to. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two things diverge, but I don't think that we're ever going to be able to find another way of handling the complex problem solving that we need to do in academia, especially across like diversity of expertise as well, bringing different people together from different disciplines, not only to answer the questions, but also to find out what the questions are in the first place, to kind of set the agenda.
Yeah, exactly. Because in the industry, certainly in a help desk environment, you're faced with problems to which there should be an answer, even if the answer is we don't support this kind of functionality. But in research, as you quite rightly say, there is sometimes we don't know what the question is, or we are inching towards it. So there are quite significant differences. So thanks for highlighting that. Looking into the crystal ball to finish it all off. The fellowship, I think, is for 18 months or 15 months. I can't remember. And what do you hope you will have achieved by the end of it?
I was going to say, I hope that I'm surprised. I hope that, I mean, obviously in researching like the ethical issues of the surveillance and things and thinking about considering tools, and I had to write about that in a couple of the applications I had that weren't successful. I think I understand the ethical issues well, but I know that my perspective on them is only my perspective. So it would be great if some of my understanding was supported. So it's not just Cass thinks that, it's like the community thinks that. But also I would love to be surprised, a new set of perspectives on the issues. I think what I would love to get towards is like a mitigation of where there are issues. So for example, I'm imagining that, say on a Slack workspace, if we are monitoring engagement there in an automated way, do we need to have a pop-up little box that's there every day, all the time, saying your activity here is being monitored? That's a mitigation that I can think of, but I don't necessarily think that within the fellowship that we need to get as far as mitigations. I just want to know what the issues are. If we do get as far as mitigations, then cool. But I think we were encouraged a lot in the fellowships to not try and reach too far. And obviously with the funding and the time that's available, I would be happy just to have a stronger exploration of at least some of the issues and maybe some kind of fringe highlights on where the edge cases are. Because like I said, it's the technological tooling is not difficult. It's understanding what the complexity is, and also, you know, making a space for this conversation to happen and for people to know that we're having these conversations, because there's a few high profile community, like research community funders and things, for example. So I'd like them to be aware that not only would it be valuable for their community managers to have this information, but also it would be valuable for them to collect it in a way that is aligned with the ethics of the organization.
My next guest is Samantha Ahern, who you've heard right at the start. I've met Samantha during my time as an RSE at the University College London, where she has been working already in training and teaching. So it's probably not a surprise that her fellowship will focus on this area, as you will hear from her now.
I'm Samantha Ahern. I co-lead the education activity in UCL Centre for Advanced Research and Computing.
Indeed, but that's not the only thing you're doing, because you're also, I believe, a trustee of the Society of Research Software Engineering, aren't you?
Yeah, and I'm also on the board of the Carpentries as well. I've taken over the lead for the programme committee as well this year. So
Right.
yeah.
And is there any time left then for the Software Sustainability Institute? Because the reason we're talking actually is because you're a fellow.
Yeah, so they all interweave is how I see it. They're all around that people and skills development space. And I see it as one big braid of things that are interweaved and have kind of golden threads running through them.
So what exactly is the project that you applied for to become a fellow?
So people and skills is a big thing for the UKRI, a big thing for a number of years. And there's been a number of funding channels through the UKRI centrally and the different research councils that are doing very similar things, almost identical things,
right,
in different spaces, in overlapping time periods. What kind of hasn't been clear is what the outcome of these projects have been and how they intersect with each other, and how collectively they're moving the digital research technical professional space forward. So yeah, it's about trying to get an idea of actually what the landscape really is and how we can tie things together to move things collectively forward, as opposed to a bit of it feels a bit like throwing mud at the wall and seeing what sticks. Okay. So, it may turn out to be a brilliant Jackson Pollock, but I'm trying to see if there's a Jackson Pollock in there or whether it's just mud splattered at the wall. It's kind of
right,
what I'm trying to achieve.
So how do you want to go about it then?
Yeah, so a lot of it is just gathering information from the different research councils about what they funded. It's working with the current Network Plus projects to understand how they're working together, how I can work with them, and seeing what's kind of coming down the pipe in terms of new funding calls as well. So they're continually investing in this strand, but we haven't yet got the lesson learned from the previous piece of work. And there doesn't seem to be that communication between the projects that have happened or are finishing and the new grants that are being written that are overlapping. I know at least 3 or 4 projects that are doing very, very similar things, and we're now collaborating to get a useful output instead of us all doing the same thing. So, for instance, we both collected data sets about what training exists.
Yeah.
And now it's combining it into one data set that we want the community to own. And we're going to have a meeting in a few weeks to think about how we move that forwards collectively and where we get the support from to look after that data set. Where do we house it? As a collective endeavour. And it's kind of pulling those strings, like those kind of behind doors conversations, but getting that out in the open really and surfacing what we've learned to move forward.
It's quite a challenging task because, as you say, there are quite a number of training strands happening all over the place. And yes, you're right. I don't know how many Git courses there are, for instance, but it's got to be quite a few. Putting all of that together is one element, but you need to find out who's involved in that. Then, as you say, there is the logistics of where you're going to put it. And then there's the question of who's going to look after it, because you will probably step down from doing that at some stage in the future, who knows, or other people might. So that's quite a formidable task. So what do you think you will achieve within the fellowship period, which I think is funding for about a year or 2?
Yeah, it's about 15 months. So that is to just understand what projects have been funded in this space through UKRI funding, what they achieved, what they've learnt, and then what the synergies are. So what can we pull together and what can we share to then inform current and future grants so that we're not repeating things that are very, very similar. Like there's multiple pieces of work on competency frameworks at the moment that are very complementary, that aren't necessarily conversing as much as they maybe could be. And that maybe needs to have a bit of a nudge in hey, look, you've got big overlapping things. I know you both need to demonstrate output, but we may get a better output for the broader community if we do this together.
I think that kind of silo thinking is really embedded because, as you say, everybody needs to demonstrate their output, right? So we've done something with this funding and therefore here it is and here's another cause.
So my background is secondary education. Kind of you're all in it together. So you do everything together. You write a scheme of work, you share it with your peers, you might share it with other schools in the county. You will put it on the test platform, which then had free sharing of materials. So there wasn't this siloism. And, the team that I come from within UCL is also all about team science, right? There is no working on your own. The ethos of a team is this collaborative endeavour. And I think maybe that's where we're maybe slightly different to other ecosystems. That we still have this for the greater good piece rather than the prestige piece traditionally around research. We do both, right? And Peter, you know this from the team, that we have this dual identity, but there are things that are stronger in one space than the other, right? That we are by nature team players and have a team ethos. And I think that also comes through from my own background in that I don't get why you just wouldn't do it together, right? It kind of, in my head, I've never really understood this siloing in higher education, really.
Well, here's your chance to do that. And did you encounter then people who say, well, I'd rather not share that? Or do you find people are open to, oh yeah, well, let's get together. Great, somebody has this idea of putting it all together.
There's a bit of both. You get this duality, right? And you get this sometimes in conversations like, yeah, great, we need to get this thing. But, we shouldn't worry too much about making sure we do things other stuff. But we should do the thing that we want to do for our project. And I'm just a bit like, but it's kind of the same thing. So you've got this kind of this double-edged sword of, yeah, it's great, but, there's always kind of this weird little but that I'm hoping to shift the dial on.
So, I mean, with all the different hats that you're on, because I think at UCL, you're looking after teaching as well. You're part of the carpentries. You're in the Society of Research Software Engineering in the UK, and now you're an SSI fellow. I mean, so many different hats. How do you juggle all of that?
So I think it's all part of the same thing. So with the Teaching and Training SIG for the Society of RSE, we've got a discourse grant, and we're looking at actually how we reward and develop those that are doing those teaching and training roles in those DRTP spaces is the piece of work that's about to start, actually, and that's based on a pathway I put together at UCL. So for me, it's all about fundamentally teaching and learning, right? It's making sure that the people that are doing the teaching are developed and can thrive in that when it's a bit part of their job. They shouldn't lose out on promotion or recognition because they're doing more teaching than they are RSEing or, sys admin, and that's kind of unfair. So let's make sure that's recognised, and that's the discourse piece. And then I guess that ties into the quality of teaching and learning and that bit of understanding around, well, what do our audience actually need in terms of training, and then making sure that the training's there for them. People can't progress in their career and learning if there isn't the training to help take that forward. We've all got budget constraints, so going out and buying training and bringing external trainers in isn't an option. So if there is open educational resources about materials like the carpentries that we can pick up and reuse and we can modify for ourselves, then that's the way forwards, and if we're all working off the same pot of central government money, then surely that should be a collective endeavour for the greater public good than just kind of individual things that may or may not move the dial on their own.
Well, I think it's a noble aim, and I hope that people will see that. So good luck to you.
I'm nothing if never not a little bit ambitious in what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, somebody has to be, and somebody has to do something to move the needle a little bit, which is what this is all about, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And finally, we come to Sara. Like all the previous fellows you've heard, Sara has been active in the space of open science and research software for quite some time, not least the OLS, or formerly known as the Open Life Science Network, as she will tell us now.
I am Sara Villa. I am the community and training lead for a non-for-profit organization called OLS. And I am also the community management chair for the Turing Way.
OLS, that's the Open Life Science, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. We migrated there because we don't only do like life sciences anymore. So that's why now we go for the OLS acronym.
Right, okay. Yeah. To kind of hide the life science. So you've been at OLS and the Turing Way for quite some time, haven't you?
I have. So working directly, so as part of the OLS team, I have been only free since September. I have been working in different capacities with them for several years already. I actually started my journey as a mentee in one of their open science training programs.
Oh, right.
Yeah, like 6 years ago, I think. And from there, I did the total development mentee, then mentor, then expert. And then I hosted my own training cohort while I was working at King's College London, contextualizing it to neuroscience.
Okay, so you were at King's College and then you went into OLS as a
Yes.
collaborator or community manager. What does a community manager do?
That is a great question. Well, we do a lot of things. So for OLS, I am working both to nurture the community and also taking care of all the training processes. At the moment, I should say training takes most of my time, but I still try to take care and nurture the community. So we do a lot of talking, I think, grab coffees with people, even if it is virtual ones, make sure that the organization still serves its purpose and that we are doing what we are supposed to do, live by our values, and stay open. So both OLS and the Turing Way are open communities. So we really want to put the effort in onboarding people, bringing new people in, bringing new voices.
Right. And you mentioned Turing Way, where you're a community manager as well, aren't you?
Yes. So Turing Way now has migrated since last year to a community-oriented governance. Before, it used to have like a paid community manager when it was depending on the Alan Turing Institute, but we are not depending on the Alan Turing Institute anymore. We are an independent organization now. So we have our governance totally defined with a steering committee. Then we work in different working groups. So community management has now been taken over the community management working group. And I'm just the chair in there. Like I just make sure that some things get done, but like most of the work is actually done by several people.
I think we're now ready to talk a little bit about your SSI fellowship because you became an SSI Software Sustainability Institute fellow this year. So how did that happen?
I know, it's been kind of like a dream. I actually applied the year before and didn't get it with a totally different project. This year I thought I'm just going to focus on what I really enjoy and what I'm doing now, which is community and community building. So my SSI fellowship is very focused on community building and working directly with all the communities that I'm involved with. So OLS, the Turing Way, but also the Society for RSE, SSI in general, another community that I've been working with called Data Science for Health Equity. So it's just bringing together all those learnings and knowledges from different communities.
What specifically is it that you applied for?
Let's see. The idea is try to bring so what I realized working with all these communities, even if they are all research-oriented communities or scientific-oriented communities, they all work in very different ways. Quite successfully, I must say, but they work very differently. And that really struck me as an outsider. Like I was working as a researcher myself till last year. So I don't have like a formal knowledge on community building. And I think a lot of people doing a lot of work on communities, they actually don't have that formal instructor as well. So I thought, why don't we bring together a Wikipedia or a case report, the best practices, like how people do things, basically, instead of having to talk to everyone. So like, here's a list on, in this community, governance is taken care by this, or in this community, communications are done like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but like a list of learnings, let's say.
Okay. So what made you apply for the fellowship in the first place?
I've been involved with the SSI as well as part of all of my open science and community journey, I guess, for a while. So I think it was just like the cherry on top. So I really admire what the SSI is doing. They're living by their values. They're taking care and nurturing communities as well. So I thought, why don't I try to formalize my engagement with them? The vast network of fellows is amazing. I know that everyone who's a fellow is always like a great person to have a conversation with and learning something from. So I thought it was a great opportunity that I couldn't let pass.
But this is your second application, so you applied before. Can I just ask what that project was about?
Of course. So that was a more training-based project, ironically. Okay. Yes. So I think the point of that was it is a great project, but feels like you could do it on your own. You don't really need, the fellows network. While in this one, I would really benefit from talking to all the fellows. And this year, actually, there are several fellows who I will be collaborating with this project.
Yeah, I think your name got mentioned when I talked to Cass, for instance.
Oh, yes, Cass. Yes, exactly. So we'll be directly collaborating for this as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what is it that you think the fellowship will bring to this project, to your work as a community manager, in addition to what you're already doing as a community manager? I mean,
Yes, I think the most important thing that will bring me is the access to a lot of people doing amazing work and doing a great job in community building that I normally wouldn't have access to. So like just have that platform to say, hey, who would like to share their learnings? Let's all work together. Let's try to make something impactful. I think that's something that I wouldn't get anywhere else.
finally, if you imagine that it's a year later, so it's March 2027, and you know the kind of question, but what do you think you will have achieved by then?
I'm hoping to at least, so have had a handle on the different practices in different communities, and then to at least have hosted 2 or 3 workshops to bring together, people doing great job and just like hear them out, listening and exchange knowledge. I think if only I got to do that, that would be perfect.
For anyone who's applying to the SSI fellowship, are there any particular tips you would give them?
I guess one very important tip would be check other fellows out, make sure to involve the community, make sure that you are living by the SSI values, that you make your work open, that you make your work collaborative. I think one of the things that brought my attention to the SSI, even when I was a researcher years ago, was the collaborative spirit. It is a weird thing to have still or yet in 2026. So if you're all in for collaboration, I think that you'll be fine. But if not, I would say that is a strong point for applications.
All right. Talking about collaboration, will people find you at the Collaborations workshop?
Yes, they will. I will be actually leading one workshop to work on my specific fellowship plans. And I will be also like collaborating with other 2 workshops. So yes, you'll definitely see me there.
So if you happen to go to the Collaborations workshop of the SSI this year, say hi to Sara, who, as you heard, will be running a workshop there. The Collaborations workshop has become an institution, and this year it'll be held in Belfast between the 28th and 30th of April. Yep, just a couple of weeks after this episode went live. The SSI Fellowship has turned into an invaluable network of people who want to help build better and more sustainable software and technologies for research. Better software, better research, after all. And later this season you will hear from the organizers of the fellowship and also from other fellows who also joined the network this year. But for next week, we're going to dive into a very different subject altogether. A subject that I've been mulling over for quite some time. How do we make sure that the data we generate, either through our work or privately, gets saved and preserved? And I met with a few experts in the field to find out. I hope you'll tune in then. But before I leave you, I would like to thank the Software Sustainability Institute for supporting the show. Thanks for listening. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.